the Necromancer. Pablo's head throbbed with searing pain from the baseball bat that had struck him moments ago. He struggled to regain his bearings, his world spinning in chaos as he heard her screams in the night air. Only a few months earlier, Pablo had moved to this small, remote town in search of a fresh start. At the age of 19, he was nervous about leaving behind his old life, but his uncle had taken him in, his last living family member. Pablo's athletic build and good looks made him an instant object of fascination at the local high school. The guys welcomed him to the football team, while the girls, especially Nikki, the cheerleading captain and the town's self-proclaimed princess, couldn't help but notice him. The sheriff's daughter had decided that Pablo would be her new conquest. However, fate had other plans, as Pablo had found himself drawn to Haley, the preacher's daughter. Haley was a breath of fresh air, steadfast in her values and chastity, reserving her affection for the one she would marry. While many guys found this a turn-off, Pablo was captivated by her and believed she was the one he had been waiting for. Over the next few months, Haley began to see Pablo as more than just another suitor. Their relationship blossomed, but not everyone was pleased. One evening, Pablo and Haley found a secluded spot beneath the stars in a park. Pablo had prepared a picnic, and he handed Haley a unique necklace with a peculiar, frozen-like design. "What is this?" Haley asked, initially taken aback by the odd jewelry. Pablo chuckled, explaining that it was a protective family heirloom. "It's been in my family for generations," he said. "I want you to have it, Haley. You've become the most important person in my life, and I want to ensure your safety." Touched by his gesture, Haley accepted the unusual gift and rewarded Pablo with a kiss, her first. Blushing and beaming, Pablo responded with a passionate kiss of his own. Haley closed her eyes, believing she had found her future husband. Then, in a horrifying instant, Pablo was attacked from behind. As he fell, his eyes locked onto the nightmarish scene unfolding before him. Haley screams as she was dragged away by two menacing figures and her clothes being ripped from her body. "Leave her alone!" Pablo shouted, trying to scramble to his feet, but his knee gave way, sending him crashing to the ground. He could only watch in desperation as Haley was pulled further away. Nikki, the orchestrator of this cruel ambush, approached Pablo, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "What's the matter, Pablo?" she taunted. "Did you think you could choose that holy bitch over me?" Pablo, struggling to breathe through his pain, tried to reason with her. "Nikki, please, don't do this." Nikki's laughter pierced the night air as her two accomplices continued to torment Haley in the distance. "You should have thought of that before you rejected me. I'm the princess of this town, and no one defies me." Pablo's pleas fell on deaf ears as Nikki swung the baseball bat again, striking him across the face and knocking him back to the cold ground. Nikki returned to her brothers, who continued their vile acts on Haley. They mocked her, calling her a tease as they continued their torment. Pablo, regaining consciousness, could only hear Haley's agonized cries as he lay helpless on the ground. Desperation and rage swelled within him, but he was too injured to intervene. Nikki's laughter echoed in his ears as she leaned down and kissed him with an insane, wicked smile. Suddenly, her expression shifted from amusement to disgust. "You're pathetic," she sneered at him, delivering another brutal blow with the bat before knocking him out again. Nikki stumbled away, joining her brothers near the violated Haley. She taunted and brutalized her, blaming her for getting in the way. "You forgot the rule in this town, bitch," Nikki hissed. "I'm the princess, and you're nothing but a peasant." Nikki's fury escalated as she pummeled Haley mercilessly over and over. The screams eventually ceased, replaced by silence. The police arrived later that night, finding Pablo sobbing and cradling Haley's lifeless body. Pablo was arrested and charged with Haley's murder. Nikki's father, the sheriff, covered up the crime, and the town turned against Pablo, convinced of his guilt. 2 days later, in a solitary cell, Pablo would be found hanging from a bedsheet he'd fashioned into a noose. Haley's father held a ceremony, claiming the cowardly man had taken his own life and would be judged for his sins. The town believed justice had been served. Months passed, and the town gradually moved on from the horrific ordeal, or so they thought. That night, a blood-red moon cast an eerie glow over the town, watching the play about to begin. Out on the outskirts of town, an eerie, otherworldly howl echoed through the air, akin to a relentless, unstoppable locomotive hurtling toward the unsuspecting town. The people, caught off guard, were buffeted by this unnatural windstorm, their bodies nearly knocked off balance, and loose objects sent tumbling and crashing. Terrified animals sought refuge under any available shelter, their instincts screaming danger. As the tempestuous wind roared through the town that fateful night, the townsfolk who found themselves exposed to its wrath stood in stunned silence, their eyes locked in confusion and fear. Panic rippled through their ranks as they exchanged bewildered glances, each one silently wondering, what in the world could this be? In the cemetery, the wind slowed until it reached Haley's grave, marked by her name. Within the ornate coffin, Haley lay motionless, trapped in a recurring nightmare. In her mind, she relived the horrors of that night, the taunts, the violence, and the betrayal. Clutching the necklace Pablo had given her, it glowed with a sinister green light. "Do you want revenge?" a haunting voice whispered in her mind. "Yes," Haley replied. Her body convulsed, and her eyes snapped open, fiery red with anger. She pounded against the coffin, shattering it, and emerged from the ground as a shadow. In the moon's glow, Haley's transformation unfolded. Her skin turned ghostly white, her hair grew long and silver, and her attire morphed into a dark, seductive ensemble. Her once vibrant eyes were now solid black, devoid of life. With a wicked grin, Haley commanded the wind to awaken her undead army. The ground shook as skeletal hands burst from the earth, and an army of the undead stood before her. The undead soldiers were grotesque and fearsome. Their skin was pallid, stretched tightly over bone. Their eyes were hollow sockets that glowed with an eerie, malevolent light. Tattered clothing clung to their emaciated bodies, and their bony fingers twitched with a hunger for vengeance. Haley gazed upon her macabre soldiers, her black lips curling with anticipation for the night ahead. The undead army, driven by her will, awaited her command to unleash their unholy fury upon the town that had wronged her. The town, shrouded in darkness under the blood-red moon, remained oblivious to the malevolent force rising from the cemetery. As Haley's undead army stood at her command, she gazed upon her grotesque soldiers with a sense of anticipation for the night ahead. With a silent gesture, she ordered her unholy minions to advance upon the town. The undead, driven by an insatiable hunger for revenge, moved silently but swiftly, their hollow eyes gleaming with malice. The first sign of trouble came as terrified screams pierced the night air. The townsfolk, snuggling into their beds or gathered in their homes, were caught completely off guard. Some attempted to flee, while others sought refuge in their houses, locking doors and windows as if it could protect them from the supernatural onslaught. The wind howled louder now, carrying the scent of decay and dread into every corner of the town. It seemed to whisper promises of retribution and despair to all who heard it. Shadows moved in the darkness, and the undead descended upon their unsuspecting victims. Panic and chaos ensued as the undead army wreaked havoc upon the town, exacting vengeance for the horrors visited upon Haley. As the undead army led by Haley descended upon the chaotic town, the preacher, like many other townsfolk, found himself caught in the chaos. He was unaware of the sinister transformation his daughter had undergone after her death and the unholy alliance she had forged with the undead. In the midst of the terror and destruction, the preacher tried desperately to protect those around him. He took up a makeshift weapon, a wooden cross, and attempted to fend off the relentless onslaught of the undead. His faith and determination were strong, but he was ultimately outnumbered and overpowered by the malevolent forces. The preacher fought valiantly to the end, his prayers and pleas for divine intervention echoing through the night. However, his efforts were in vain, and he met a tragic demise at the hands of the vengeful undead. At the other end of the town, the sheriff, armed with his service revolver, confronted the nightmarish scene trying to maintain his sanity. He then spotted Haley amidst the chaos, her appearance transformed into a spectral figure of malevolence. She approached him, her eyes now solid black and her lips curled in a sinister smile. "Hello, Sheriff," she speaks coldly like a predator stalking its prey. "Haley?" The sheriff questioned in fear and bewilderment. In a panic, the sheriff fired his gun, the bullet piercing through Haley's shoulder, but it was to no avail. The sheriff watched in horror as Haley spit the bullet up and into her outstretched hand, and the wound the bullet had made healed instantly. "Please, Haley," the sheriff pleaded, his voice trembling with fear and guilt. Haley's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression unyielding, as if she were listening to his confession. "I beg you for forgiveness," the sheriff continued, his voice breaking. "I beg you to understand that I didn't see what was happening. I didn't see the truth until it was too late. I let my daughter become a monster, and I'm so sorry." The sheriff's words hung in the air, carried away by the wind that seemed to carry with it the weight of his regrets. He fell to his knees, the revolver slipping from his trembling hand. Tears streamed down his face as he met Haley's spectral eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos around them. "Can you ever find it in your heart to forgive a father who failed his own daughter?" Haley's gaze remained unyielding, but there was a flicker of something, a hint of recognition, in her eyes. The wind carried her reply, a haunting whisper that echoed in the sheriff's ears. "Forgiveness is beyond my grasp now, Sheriff, just as it was beyond yours when you allowed this horror to unfold." Haley leaned in, her spectral form drawing closer, and in a shocking moment of intensity and sensuality, she kissed the sheriff hard on the lips. Time seemed to stand still as their lips met, a bizarre and macabre union between the living and the vengeful dead. It was a kiss filled with an otherworldly energy that left the sheriff stunned and breathless. But as quickly as the kiss had begun, it ended, and Haley pulled back. Black, viscous ooze dripped from her lips onto the sheriff's trembling form. He felt a sudden, intense fear surge through him as he sensed something crawling down his throat. Panicked, he clutched his chest, his eyes wide with terror. The black ooze inside him seemed to writhe and churn, as if it had a life of its own. The sensation was excruciating, a torment beyond imagination. Standing over him, Haley watched with a cold, unfeeling gaze as the ooze continued its malevolent work. The sheriff's body convulsed violently as the ooze began to rot his insides, turning flesh and bone into a grotesque, decaying mass. In an instant, the once authoritative figure of the sheriff began to disintegrate. His insides crumbled to dust, and his skin sagged and peeled away, flopping to the ground in a sickening heap. All that remained was a pile of lifeless, crumbling remnants. The sheriff's fate was sealed, his body reduced to nothing more than a memory of the man he had once been. Down the street, the two brothers desperately fled from the relentless horde of skeletal figures pursuing them. Their panicked footsteps echoed through the darkened streets as they strained to put distance between themselves and the pursuing undead. In their frenzied escape attempt, one of the brothers, driven by fear and adrenaline, tripped and fell to the ground. He cried out in terror as he scrambled to regain his footing, but it was too late. The other brother, realizing that his sibling was about to be overtaken by the skeletal horde, looked back and made a fateful decision. In a cowardly act of self-preservation, he abandoned his fallen brother, leaving him to the mercy of the relentless skeletons. As he ran away, the sound of his brother's desperate pleas for help pierced the night air, along with the sickening sound of bones breaking over and over again until it became nothing more than a haunting whisper. The fleeing brother rushed into a nearby building, seeking refuge from the nightmarish pursuit. Panic and despair gripped him as he barricaded himself in a back bathroom, locking the door behind him. Alone in the dimly lit room, he began to cry and hyperventilate, struggling to grasp the horrifying reality of the situation. Suddenly, in the eerie silence, a haunting voice cut through the darkness, calling his name. He froze, his heart pounding, as he heard Haley's voice echoing from the mirror in the bathroom. He turned and saw her spectral figure staring at him, her eyes solid black and filled with malevolence. In a flash, Hayley reached out her ghostly arms, her fingers elongating like shadowy tendrils, and she pulled the terrified brother toward the mirror. His legs flopped on the other side of the mirror's surface as he was dragged into a nightmarish abyss. The brother's cries of terror and agony were muffled by the mirror's cold glass, and as he disappeared into the spectral realm with Hayley, his body was consumed by an otherworldly force. In the darkened bathroom, all that remained were the echoes of his screams, now distant and fading, as the mirror returned to its still, reflective surface, concealing the horrific fate that had befallen the cowardly brother. As night descended, anarchy continued in the once serene town, transforming it into a malevolent battleground where the living clashed with the undead. Hayley, now a vengeful entity, commanded her skeletal army from the epicenter of the turmoil. Their eerie battle cries harmonized with the howling wind as they mercilessly hunted the living. Nikki, the self-proclaimed town princess, watched in terror from her bedroom window as the macabre undead horde overtook her beloved home. She had always scoffed at tales of the supernatural, dismissing them as mere myths. But this night shattered her skepticism into 1,000 pieces. Nikki had played a role in the tragic events that had led to Hayley's demise, and now, she was about to face the consequences. Gazing fearfully from her window, Nikki spotted Hayley, who seemed to lock eyes with her. "I've found you," Hayley whispered, her voice carrying a sinister edge, like a cat stalking its prey. With a burning hatred in her eyes, Hayley descended into Nikki's residence, moving with an uncanny, otherworldly grace that foretold doom. Nikki, trembling and desperate, tried to barricade herself in her room, but the door shattered like fragile glass. Hayley materialized before her, a harbinger of retribution. "You believed you could escape." Hayley's voice chilled the very air, her words a haunting whisper that sent shivers coursing down Nikki's spine. Tears streamed down Nikki's face as she begged for mercy. "Please, Hayley, I'm sorry. I never intended for things to escalate this far." Hayley's gaze remained unyielding. "Your apologies hold no weight now." With a mere gesture, Hayley summoned the encroaching shadows. They slithered toward Nikki, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. The shadows seemed to possess a sinister sentience of their own. Nikki's horrified gasps echoed in the room as the darkness ensnared her, pulling her deeper into its inky abyss. The shadows tightened their grip, pressing against Nikki's skin, infiltrating her very being. A cacophony of anguished screams filled the room as Nikki's form contorted and twisted, her face contorting with unbearable pain. Her body seemed to merge with the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. It was a gruesome transformation. Nikki's once pristine skin turned ashen, her eyes hollow voids of despair. She became a spectral figure, trapped in an eternal torment, forever bound to the shadows. Her agonized cries dissolved into eerie, ghostly whispers that hung heavy in the air, serving as a grim reminder of her treachery. Emerging from Nikki's house, Hayley's steps carried her with purpose toward the center of the dimly lit street. Around her, a legion of the undead moved with eerie efficiency, executing a grim retribution upon the inhabitants of the malevolent town that had so grievously wronged both her and Pablo. The symphony of their terrified screams filled the air, a haunting chorus that seemed to revel in the anguish and desperation. Amidst this macabre ballet of vengeance, Hayley found herself unable to suppress a subtle smile, her eyes closed as if savoring the discordant melody of suffering. But then, like a whisper in the shadows, a familiar presence brushed against her consciousness. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing Pablo standing beside her. Unlike the skeletal forms of the undead, he stood before her in his former human state, a vivid reminder of the life they once shared. With a gesture both tender and profound, Pablo reached for Hayley's cold hand. In the glow of moonlight and turmoil, their gazes locked, and affectionate smiles played upon their lips. Hand in hand, they turned away from the ongoing havoc, their figures gradually dissipating into the shroud of the night. The symphony of screams and the tapestry of chaos faded into the distance, leaving only an enigmatic stillness in their wake.